Hey everybody, Kris and Amerikos here, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to tell you how to give advice in English. And really, we can start by talking about words that help us give advice. Like the word suggest, to suggest something, or maybe to suggest something to someone. And when we suggest or make a suggestion, this means that we tell someone what we think is right or what we think is good to do. So maybe your friend says, "Where should we eat dinner tonight?" And you say, "I suggest the Chinese restaurant across the street." Right? I suggest it. And this is your advice. You think that this place is good. This is a good answer. This is a good option for where you'll eat dinner tonight. Now, when you suggest something, it doesn't mean that you absolutely love that place. It just means that this is your advice for this situation. Now, another thing that you could say is you could say, "I recommend," right? If you say, "I recommend this place," then this does mean that I think it's great and I definitely want to go there, right? I recommend it. It means that I personally think that it's very, very good overall, not only for this situation, but in general, it's a great place. I recommend it. And to recommend means to tell someone else about it, right? That's what recommend really means. For example, you could recommend the restaurant to your friends. So to recommend means that it's good enough for you to tell other people about it. And suggest just means that we think it's good for this situation. We think it's good as an answer or a solution to the problem or question that we have right now. So suggest and recommend are two ways that we can give advice. We can also give advice to someone by saying should. And the word should is different than the word must. It's different than the word have to, right? Or two words, have to. But should also shows that we're giving advice. It also tells us that we think something is good. We think this is the right answer, right? Like, for example, your friend says, "Where are we going to eat tonight?" And you say, "If you like Chinese restaurants, if you like Chinese food, you should go to the Chinese restaurant across the street," right? You should. I think it's good for you to do this, right? And when we say shouldn't, it means that we think something is bad or that that we do not want them to do it, right? Like, you shouldn't smoke. This doesn't mean that it's a rule. It just means that I think it's bad. I think it's not good to do it, right? So should is also a word that we can use to give advice. And it doesn't mean that it's a rule or a law. If it's a rule or a law, we should say must or have to. But if it's just advice, if we're just telling them what we think is good, we should say should. Now, there are some other phrases that we can use to give advice as well. For example, we can say, "Why don't you?" Like your friend says, "Where should we eat tonight?" And you say, "Why don't you go to the Chinese restaurant across the street? Why don't you?" And this means you should try it, right? It means you can do this. Why don't you do this? It's a suggestion. It's another way that we can give advice. Another good phrase that we might use is, "If I were you." If I were you. For example, where should we go to eat? If I were you, I would go to the Chinese restaurant. So this is a way to say that, it's not possible for me to be you, but in this situation, if I were you, then I would do this. All right? And yes, it sounds strange, right? If I were. Usually we say I was. So I were, it sounds like a mistake, right? But this is a very special situation in English. We don't need to talk about it a lot because we don't see it a lot. But just remember that when we say this special phrase, "if I were you," that we always say were. If I were you, I would learn more English grammar. if you want more of an answer to that question. Great. So the last phrase that we're going to talk about today is you had better. You had better. And our example about the restaurant, it doesn't really work here because you had better, it means if you do not do the thing that I tell you, then something bad will happen. So it's a kind of advice, but also it can be like a threat. You know, you're telling somebody if they don't do it, something bad will happen, and then they need to think, oh, does that mean that this person will do something bad or just something bad will happen in the future, right? We don't know. For example, let me give you an example, right? I can say, you had better pay for your food at the restaurant, right? If you don't pay for your food at the restaurant, something bad will happen. The police will find you. The people in the restaurant will, I don't know how they'll get this money from you, but they will, right? So you had better pay for your food at the restaurant. You had better do it. And this phrase, had better, you had better do it, this means that if you do not do this, something bad will happen. So this is another way that we can give advice. And so let's go back through all of the different ways that we talked about today in this video. We talked about had better, or you had better, right? We talked about if I were you. We talked about why don't you? We talked about you should. We talked about we talked about I recommend, and we also talked about I suggest, right? And I recommend and I suggest, we use those examples about suggesting the Chinese restaurant or recommending the Chinese restaurant, but sometimes after recommend and suggest, we can also use a verb. And when we do, it has to be a gerund. It has to have the ing ending. So for example, I suggest going to the Chinese restaurant, or I recommend going to the Chinese restaurant. So because after recommend and after suggest we have a verb, we have to use ing, going, right? We cannot say I suggest to go. We should say I suggest going. All right, well, I think that's enough information for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and press like, press subscribe, and write a comment down below. And if you didn't like this video, you don't have to write a comment, but I mean, you're welcome to. It's YouTube and it's the internet, and you know, wherever you see this video, I'm sure you can write comments. So, I mean, feel free, but you don't have to. I suggest not writing a comment if it's negative, actually. That's my suggestion. That's my advice in this video about giving advice. If you would like to practice speaking English with me and with other teachers, then you can click on the link under this video to join our Everyday English program. And if you want to learn how to speak better English as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, I will tell you how you can do that the fastest way in my free seminar, and there's also a link for my free seminar under this video. So click those links, press like, subscribe, write a comment, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.